This is the resurrection of people and eternal life from now on is our reality. Chapter 2, Section 3. I'm Stephen Walters. I'm a real human being. This is my real human voice. And I'm going to continue reading Grigori Grabovoi. Resurrection is the most real, the most pragmatic, the most rational, and the most convincing basis for the consequent development of the thinking of the generations to come. 3.11. It is perfectly obvious that the resurrection is the most real, the most pragmatic, the most expedient, and the most probative base for further development. So I will just say a few words on the role of the resurrection for the development of thinking of posterity. However, prior to that, I will explain the meaning of certain terms. I am talking about what intellect, mind, knowledge, a thought, and a feeling are. Intellect. Intellect is a structure which consolidates the reactions of consciousness of the body, of the spirit, and of the soul. This is the system of their intertwining at the perception level, informational or actual intertwining. The word intertwining, used here, gives an idea how the reactions mentioned would be seen as a whole when taking an outside perspective. And it should be noted that consciousness, the body, the spirit, and the soul exist in perception at the level of their effect. The effect on perception as well as on the perceiver, in which case is the intellectual harmonious. The intellect is harmonious when the soul, the spirit, the body, and consciousness, and besides, we need to add here the phenomena of reality too. So, when all these elements, when all these objects are in harmony with one another, when the intellect is harmonious. In this case, in the case of harmony, one may speak of the true intellect. It may also be called the intellect of development, the intellect of a person. To define intellect more laconically, we may say that intellect is the structure of a person who is aware of the relations within the phenomena under consideration, and at the same time aware of the connection of this phenomena with all other world phenomena by having control of them. Mind. The mind is a way to react to information, to the external influence. Since any object may react to information, to the external influence, the concept of the mind may be applied to any object. But we will be speaking of the human mind. And the examination of the characteristics of the mind as it develops is of particular interest to me. During the resurrection, in the process of the resurrection, the mind's organization starts from the cellular level. The mind formation occurs, of course, on the basis of the soul. The information on the creation of each cell element, even of each microelement, of each atom, of each nucleus, and of the elements of still deeper levels is embedded in the mind. The mind may serve as a certain characteristic of an object. For example, if you try to prick a cell with a needle and it tries to resist it, this cell may be called clever, compared with the cells which offer less or no resistance at all. The mind may be regarded as a notion unifying the soul, the spirit, consciousness, and the body. Identification and unification of entities according to the mode of their reaction and responses take place in the mind. It should be noted that the problem of the resurrection is as well to a significant degree a problem of the mind. If the mind of a person is evolved enough, the resurrection does not appear to him as something extraordinary. He regards this phenomena as natural. The same goes for immortality. If a person recognizes immortality as a normal state, it means that this person's mind is highly evolved. In this case, we may even say that his mind is the reflection of eternity and of the Creator. Above, I virtually define the mind as a structure that unifies different elements according to the technology of their reaction, their response. Now, I will add to this the following. The mind is also an organizing structure for reaching goals, for achieving anything at all. That is, the mind can be viewed as a mechanism for accomplishing, a system for achieving, for example, the resurrection or immortality or something else. Knowledge. Knowledge is both moving from consciousness into the soul and then back from the soul into consciousness, and the result of this moving. In simple terms, it can be explained as follows. There is a certain element in consciousness which from time to time calls on the soul reservoir, draws information there, and comes back, let's say, more enlightened. As a result, consciousness accumulates knowledge. That is, basically, the consciousness structure becomes transformed due to its contact with the soul. So knowledge is what we have as a result of such a contact. That is, in actual fact, knowledge is a contact of consciousness with the soul. Knowledge may be acquired, for example, through reading. However, it should be kept in mind that according to the law of universal connections, whatever has been read, in fact primordially, exists in the soul. The same is true as for any other ways of acquiring knowledge as well. I will note that clairvoyance is based on the direct perception of knowledge held in the soul. The soul controls knowledge. The control status belongs to the soul. After acquiring knowledge, the problem of its implementation arises. The mind is responsible for knowledge implementation. The above said may be illustrated as follows. Let's think of a big reservoir. We may identify this reservoir with the mind. The reservoir, that is, the mind, holds knowledge. The mind regulates the outflow of knowledge from the reservoir. We also need to mention a specific role of knowledge for the resurrected. During the resurrection, the one being resurrected goes through knowledge formation, and knowledge forms in the process of registering everything that takes place. Knowledge comes as a result of a sort of processing of the events taking place. As a result, during the initial period of its knowledge, that is, what the world represents in perception, that becomes the criterion of the world evolution for the resurrected one. This is one of the differences between the resurrected one and the living. The living one is connected with the entire reality from the moment of his birth, but the resurrected one was for some time in a different state. He lived without a formed physical body. That is why when his body is assembled, and as a result of registering the undergoing process, his knowledge of the world is formed. This knowledge is an intermediate connection element between his formation and the external reality, and therefore, during the initial stage, it is knowledge that for him is the criterion of the entire developing world. Hence, we can see that in the process of the resurrection, knowledge also serves as a certain mechanism. This circumstance is utilized in the technological devices I have developed for the resurrection of people and the regeneration of lost organs and tissues. Here is the idea. From the direction of the device comes the needed information, perceived from the other side by the one being resurrected as real. Interconnectivity of these two sides is provided by the intermediate mechanism, the mechanism of knowledge. That is, its precise purpose of use in this case. With the use of clairvoyance, the speed of the resurrection increases manifold, and the resurrection may even be instantaneous. The purpose of creating technical devices for the resurrection of people is to create the collective consciousness, which will allow every person to perform the resurrection based on his own spiritual core. Of course, there are still a number of specific technical factors. For example, the fact that the information preferably be communicated to the one being resurrected by portions, discreetly, especially during the first hours, so that it could be regenerating as if walking up the steps. It is important to give the information by certain portions, because that particular knowledge is the reality criterion for the resurrected one, and through that particular criterion, he interacts with the reality. The transition to the reality criteria, used by the living, usually takes about a month to occur. In rare cases, a month and a half, 2 months. When this transition period is over for the resurrected one, then not the knowledge, but the reality itself becomes for him the criteria of the world. Thought. The thought is the information, which is a connecting link between consciousness, the spirit, and the body. At that, the thought is organized by the soul. The correlations among the concepts involved may be better seen through the example of the following analogy. Let's picture to ourselves a waterfall. Water cascades down under gravity. Gravity may be compared with the spirit, water with consciousness. A riverbed along which water runs corresponds to the body. A riverbed carries water, and the soul corresponds to what has created all this: the earth, gravity, and water. Basically, the soul participates in the creation both directly and through the thought. We may say that the thought is unified with the entire world structure and means a specific action of a person in this general structure. Feeling. A feeling is the soul's manifestation in the dynamic of the spirit and in the part where the spirit is connected with consciousness and the body. When the soul organizes the body, the feeling is that structure on which the body is built. The feeling presents, therefore, the base, the ground upon which the body is built. And that is why it is thought that a feeling comes out from the body. When interacting with reality, the feeling perceives information faster than the thought does. Now, I have already proceeded to the discussion of what the distinction between a thought and a feeling is. This is Grigori Grabovoi's writing. The feeling reacts faster. That is why a person often may say or do something first and only then realize that he shouldn't have done it. Another distinction is as follows. When a person thinks, then the feeling is in the control phase. And when a person feels, then the thought is in the control phase. I am talking now about control of reality. We see that a thought and a feeling can switch places, switch their areas, their roles. When this happens, when, for example, the thought is in the control phase, the feeling can unfold, develop. The thought and the feeling may share the same space, but herein, they, for the most part, can't be in the control phase simultaneously. The exceptions to this rule are certain special cases, such as these. When a fetus is being conceived and is developing, or when a certain cell is healing, or, in general, in the process of recuperating from a certain illness, or during the process of the resurrection. In this particular instances, the thought and the feeling can be unified, and thus they can be in one and the same places simultaneously. There's one more important distinction between the thought and the feeling. Imagine that a person encounters a certain phenomena. Naturally, he has both certain thoughts and feelings pertaining to this phenomena. However, they are formed in different ways. The thought is formed by consciousness based on all information about the external and internal world related to this phenomena. The feeling towards this phenomena is also formed by consciousness, but differently. In this process, consciousness is aware of the body, goes through the body, utilizes the information of the body, and being in full interaction with the body, consciousness forms the feeling. There are even more subtle distinctions, but I will not go into further details in this book. Now, with respect to what the thought and the feeling have in common. The common ground between them is that both thoughts and feelings determine sequence of actions in the structure of consciousness. We may speak about the existence of order in the process of consciousness, where there are their own laws of development. So, thoughts and feelings are the ones that control and determine order. To illustrate this, we may take a look, let's say, at the way an architect works. If, without going into details, well as, for example, when in the process of working on a painting, an artist doesn't paint with a painstaking detail, but paints with a large brush strokes, only what is basic. Then we may say that an architect's thoughts determine a building layout, and his feelings may assess this layout in relation to harmony, as well as may be manifested in the architect's desire to have either lunch or a cup of tea on completing his work. So thoughts and feelings may perform the same function, namely determining sequence of actions in the structure of consciousness. I may, perhaps, give another interesting example of the area where the thought and the feeling have a common ground. It is the way an external object, for example, a rock or a plant, reacts to man. Here I have to elucidate that not only plants, but rocks also have certain elements of reaction, of response, corresponding to thoughts and feelings. Of course, they're totally different, but nevertheless, a rock lives its own life too. And again, you shouldn't forget that all entities make their contribution to the general collective consciousness. Each entity's contribution is different, of course, but it exists, and that's what matters. What could, from man's perspective, be called the rock's thought and the rock's feeling? The rock's response to the outside environment may be called the rock's thought. The feeling is also a reaction, a response to the outside environment, but of another type. Well, for example, it can be a deformation. Something fell on a rock, some object, or let's say the water began dripping on it, causing deformations to occur. Even if only very small, the size is not important. The fact is that they exist, and they can be considered as a sensory evidence of a rock, as its feeling, which resulted from the interaction. So it comes out to be that if a person looks at a rock, the rock's arising reaction points along a straight line, connecting the rock with the person and towards the person. And this reaction is often both the rock's thought and the rock's feeling at the same time. That is, both the rock's feeling and its thought here are unified. When a person looks at a plant, the plant's thought and feeling also become unified, but only, unlike the rocks, the plant's response is perpendicular to the line connecting it with the person. If you have an indoor plant, comprehension of its thoughts and feelings will allow you to come into contact with it, and you will never have a problem with its watering. The plant will tell you whether to water it or it's not yet time for it. The discourse on the rock's reaction in the form of thoughts and feelings, at first glance, may seem abstract to someone. However, in actuality, that is not true at all. If we consider a case when the rock's thoughts and feelings are unified, and if we understand why it happens, then we can understand altogether how the thought is organized in terms of diffusion of knowledge from one object to another. What is more, since the generalization of the characteristics when transmitting them to other structures gives the law of connection, then based on this, we can comprehend the entire reality altogether and transmit the technologies of eternal development to any entities of the world. Imagine that you transmit your thoughts and feelings, for example, to a stone or to a plant. Now the stone and the plant, based on one of the attributes, are in the same world as man. And in that event, it is possible to learn something about them. To be precise, all their functions. Here we can draw an analogy with my mathematics. This is Grigori Grabovoi. I have already told about it in the beginning of this section. Through the use of my mathematics, I can acquire information on an unknown entity as well. I can determine all its functions. This is new mathematics. Its operators reflect the world organization, and hence it is not necessary to know all the entity attributes, including destructive ones. Putting this circumstance to use is particularly important in preventing disasters by structuring one's consciousness in the area of controlling clairvoyance. The objective of clairvoyance in this area is not to externalize negative information, but to form positive events to maximum effect. It is worthwhile to employ controlling clairvoyance, also when the data on the start of a disaster have already been fixed. I have already prevented several global disasters by this means. I would like to add the following. When there is generality between structures, then one structure can always be translated into the other, and hence, with proper, though possibly long time, practice, one may learn to translate a thought into a feeling, and a feeling into a thought. Or else, one may learn to translate one reality into another. Basically, everyone knows from his own experience that a thought attracts a certain feeling, and vice versa. A feeling may attract a thought. A person who has an ordinary state of consciousness often confuses a thought with a feeling. He may take one for the other. For example, one may think, and quite sincerely, that he loves somebody, and still in actuality, he may just not know yet, not yet have experienced, and not even suspect what true love is. Such confusion of thoughts with feelings in life continually leads to misunderstandings and sometimes even to serious complications. You can see that the discourse on thoughts and feelings opens new layers to speculate upon. For that matter, we may remember the motto, "Know thyself." One of its aspects is just the issue of feelings and thoughts. If one understands the problem, then one may start working on creating one's own cognition construct. Now we may go back to the discussion of the principle under consideration. I have been talking about the importance of the resurrection for further development, and particularly for the development of thinking of future generations. The resurrection, as we already know, is always beneficial. The resurrection on a broad scale will bring about a change in the collective consciousness. For example, children's intellect, mind, knowledge will be of a different kind. Their thoughts and feelings, as well as their body altogether, will be noted for greater harmony. They will be able to acquire information with much greater ease. Remember what I said in the introduction on different ways of acquiring information? As a result, a child will be able, for example, to create prose, poetry, to compose music, or to know advanced mathematics from beginning to end. And in so doing, it won't require of him any Herculean efforts or overwork. It's just that his intellect, mind, and all the rest will be new. He himself will be different. And I will also add that the resurrection on a broad scale will bring about a global change in knowledge altogether, and not only knowledge. Future generations will have to receive information and material objects from their own thinking, from their own spirit. Thus, the problem of the scantiness of our planet's resources will no longer exist. I, for example, in order to spread the technologies, carry out materialization of objects, thus demonstrating the real possibility of doing that. Thus, the resurrection brings about the establishment of greater harmony between man and the universe. The living one, who has not experienced death, can always regenerate, restore the gone one within a shorter, more optimal time, and as a more desired option than the resurrected one can. 3.12. First of all, about the fact that the one who has not experienced death can always regenerate, restore the gone one within a shorter time, more optimal time. When discussing principles 2.7 and 2.8, we already saw that on the informational plane, the one who has not experienced death has significant advantages as compared to the resurrected one. If we refer to the fundamentals of the world structure to the level from which everything originates, we may speak of the matrix organization of the world. On the informational level, each person has his own informational matrix. And since the true life status is non-existence of death, that is, eternal life and continual development, then in accordance with the true status of life, the one who has not experienced death has a totally transparent matrix, fully, which has access to all forms of consciousness and matter. That is why the one who has not experienced death has a higher speed of information processing and, therefore, is able to regenerate, restore the gone one within a shorter and more optimal time. Now, as to the second part of the principle, about the fact that the one who has not experienced death can regenerate the gone one in a more desired variant. First of all, what does it mean to regenerate the gone one in a more desired variant? There seems to be just one variant, isn't it? Of course, there is just one variant for the resurrected one, because the resurrected one is the very same person who she was before. It is clear when I say, this is Grigori Grabovoi saying this, in a more desired variant. I mean in a more desired variant in terms of the creative organizational plan. That is, the one who has not experienced death regenerates the gone one in such a way that the priority of life comes first, and therefore, this is the most desired variant of all. I may, perhaps, remind that with time, the resurrected one can remediate the deficiencies related to his previous biological death. He can compensate for them with his further proper development in accordance with his status, become in no way different from the ones who has not experienced death. The practice of resurrection, the practice of restoration, regeneration, is not contrary to any religion, to any law, nor to any creative trend. 3.13. This proposition is perfectly obvious, since I have repeatedly said the resurrection is always an event beneficial for all, and presently is together a fundamental principle of the universal salvation. The resurrection of people makes it possible to resurrect and restore any objects. 3.14. Let's go back to the beginning of principle 1.1. The true status of the world is an eternal life. Eternal life ensures a true world stability. The desire for a stable world creates eternal life. Since the world is truly eternal, any object exists forever. This fact is utilized in a technical apparatus, which I have developed to regenerate lost organs. The idea of the approach is as follows. Time may also be considered as a system of parallel screens. Then, naturally, the object exists beyond one of the screens. Hence, in terms of technology, to restore, to regenerate an object means just to go behind the right screen, and that's all. A real apparatus has up to, let's say, 100 parallel screens. They can be very thin. A light pulse carrying the information of the organ of concern is passed through these screens. The pulse, as it passes through one of the screens, specifically the screen sought after, passes through the structures where the organ of concern still existed, where it was intact. As a result, the pulse simply transfers the information of this healthy organ to the right place in the person's body, and the organ regenerates. If we look at the world in this connection, nothing vanishes in it, and therefore it is always possible to take something from one place and move it into another. That is, to perform a simple rearrangement. That is why it is for a reason that instead of space-time, I take displacement as a basis. If, as a basis, we take space-time, then we have to calculate coordinates, which is needless, unnecessary work. Whilst we draw on displacement, we then do not need to calculate anything. We don't need to figure out where the object in question appears, since the displacement immediately shows its location. Thus, one can always enter the time wanted, take the object sought after, and transfer it here, into our time. I researched into these matters when I was about 12. Aside from that, I've discovered that when I, in my physical body, go into the past, I exist there too. Of course, it is possible to enter any time and any space point through the spiritual structure. But now, I'm talking about entering specifically in the physical body. There are mechanisms to travel in the physical body anywhere. So you may, at will, instantaneously find yourself in any point of the universe. I would like to pinpoint an important circumstance. Principle 2.2 speaks about the interdependence of the spiritual and physical structures. That is why the popular quotation, "a sound spirit in a sound body," may be read vice versa, "a sound body in a sound spirit." We can see that the second utterance is somewhat like a reflection of the first one. In actuality, we have here an example of reading the text by reflection. The ancient Greeks, for example, read many texts through reflection. However, to modern people, this technique is unknown. The utterance, "a sound body and a sound spirit," means that a body is in the spirit, and therefore in the soul. That is, a body is a part of the soul. Above, I presented an idea based on which the apparatus for organ regeneration operates, but technical devices are just a temporary helper. Worthwhile before an adequate level of the spiritual development has been achieved. But when this level has been achieved, no auxiliaries are needed anymore. The strength of spirit is now enough to resurrect. And then it becomes apparent that the resurrection means that the soul, the spirit, consciousness, generally all that pertains to a person, reflects the existing world to the fullest extent. In the most harmonious way, and a total reflection is, in fact, the creation of the world. The resurrection embodies this verity, and therefore the resurrection of people really makes it possible to resurrect and to regenerate, to restore any objects. Always entities which existed in the past, even if they turned out to be destroyed in the present, can be fully restored, regenerated, always. In fact, true understanding of these principles allows to restore, to regenerate any entity, and this restoration can be instantaneous. To illustrate this, here is an example from my practice. For example, once on the plane, an instrument board failed, and the plane started to fall down as a result. I brought the card back to normal in real time in the falling plane, and the situation straightened out. The plane continued its normal flight. This fact was evidenced by the data, obtained as a result of the flight data recorder tape interpretation. This is the end of part 3 of Grigori Grabovoi's The Resurrection of People and Eternal Life from Now On is Our Reality.